اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم إني أسألك وأتوجه إليك بنبيك نبي الرحمة محمد صلى الله عليه وآله يا أبا القاسم يا رسول الله يا إمام الرحمة يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا أبا الحسن يا أمير المؤمنين يا علي بن أبي طالب يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها يا فاطمة الزهراء يا بنت محمد يا قرة عين الرسول يا سيدتنا ومولاتنا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيهة يا أبا محمد يا حسن بن علي أيها المجتبى يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها يا أبا عبد الله يا حسين بن علي أيها الشهيد يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها اشفع لنا عند الله يا أبا الحسن يا ولي ابن الحسين يا زين العابدين يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا يا أبا جعفر يا محمد بن علي أيها الباقر يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوصلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا يا أبا عبد الله يا جعفر بن محمد أيها الصادق يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا أبا الحسن يا موسى بن جعفر أيها الكاظم يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا أبا الحسن يا ولي ابن موسى أيها الرضا يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها يا أبا جعفر يا محمد بن علي أيها التقي الجواد يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها يا أبا الحسن يا ولي ابن محمد أيها الهادي النقي يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله يا أبا محمد يا حسن بن علي أيها الزكي العسكري يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيهان اشفع لنا عند الله يا وصي الحسن والخلف الحجة أيها القائم المنتظر المهدي يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله. عصر حاجات. يا سادتي ومواليا إني توجهت بكم أئمتي وعدتي ليوم فقري وحاجتي إلى الله وتوسلت بكم إلى الله واستشفعت بكم إلى الله فاشفعوا لي عند الله واستنقذوني من ذنوبي عند الله فإنكم وسيلتي إلى الله وبحبكم وبقربكم أرجو نجاة من الله فكونوا عند الله رجائي يا سادتي يا أولياء الله صلى الله عليهم أجمعين ولعن الله أعداء الله ظالميهم من الأولين والآخرين آمين رب العالمين. اللهم لأرواح المؤمنين والمؤمنات فاتحة. Remove the echo. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين خاتم النبيين بالقاسم محمد وأهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا. الله أما بعد فقد قال الله تبارك وتعالى وقوله الحق وهو أصدق القائلين بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا تدخلوا بيوت النبي إلا أن يؤذن لكم إلى طعام غير ناظرين إناه ولكن إذا دعيتم فادخلوا فإذا طعمتم فانتشروا. صلوات على محمد وآل محمد. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Back to our regular Tuesday night program, Dua Tawassul. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, with this tawassul of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salatu wassalam, grant us the ability to follow the commands and the teachings of Ma'asumeen. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with this tawassul, forgive our sins overlook our shortcomings, and also all of those people who have asked for dua. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with this tawassul fulfill their hajat, inshallah. I've been doing the tafsir on Tuesday nights, very briefly, of course, until the time of Maghrib, which is, well, I have 8:46 today, so I have plenty of time. I recited this ayat in continuation with the tafsir of Surah Ahzab. So we did tafsir Surah Ahzab in the month of Ramadan. And of course, because of the length of the surah, about 70 some ayat, we weren't able to complete it. And so I decided that instead of going to another discussion or another topic, continue with the tafsir. Maybe it'll take maybe another month and a half until we finish in the next 4 or 5 sessions the tafsir of this surah. Ayat number 53, which I recited for you partially. I didn't recite the entire ayah. It's a very lengthy ayah. I'll recite the translation so you understand the length of it. But up until this point, just to recap as to what was being discussed prior to this, the previous ayat were talking about the marriage of Rasulullah, and in fact the marriages of Rasulullah. And in regards to the marriage of Rasulullah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also discussed the ahkam pertaining to marriage that you and I can, of course, learn from and apply in our lives as well. Primary purpose is, of course, to mention all of these ahkam pertaining to the wives of Rasulullah in the tone, in the discussion where it is being addressed to the Prophet, but of course, in turn, all of these ahkam are being addressed to us. And this is the basis of the ahkam-e-shar'i as far as the nikah-related masail are concerned. Those are discussed briefly in these ayat. Now, after all that discussion, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so going in a sequence, the surah began by talking about the battle of Ahzab. Then it turned to discussion about Ahlul Bayt, and of course the family of Rasulullah. Then remember this discussion about Prophet's adopted son Zayd and his divorce, and then Rasulullah marrying his divorced wife. And then the discussion now lands here where we are talking about the household of Rasulullah. Now, discussion may be the house of Rasulullah, but it is actually talking about the houses that you and I also possess. Can you get them? They're making noise outside. Ayat number 53 begins by addressing the Prophet. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu. O those who believe. La tadkhulu buyutan nabi. O those who believe, do not enter the houses of Rasulullah without the permission granted to you. So the ayah says, do not enter Prophet's houses for a meal until you are granted permission, without hanging around for it to be ready, but enter when you are invited, and disperse when you have taken your meal, without cozying up for chats and gossiping here and there. Such conduct on your part offends the Prophet. If you linger around for too long, you have had your meal, you've done everything, now you're still hanging around. So this was I'll tell you the context of revelation. Context of revelation is that Rasulullah, and later on I'll allude to it again, Rasulullah is a personality which is a guide, which is a preacher, which is a teacher. He's their counselor, he's their imam, he's their Maulana, he's their lawyer, he's their doctor, he's their everything, right? So you have this personality, and people refer to Prophet for every problem that they have. So not only they're asking him related questions to their lives, to the business. If there's any family-related issues, they'll come and see Rasulullah. If there's counseling needed, they'll go ahead and approach Rasulullah. If there's a divorce taking place, they'll go ahead and approach Rasulullah. If someone wants to get married, they'll go ahead and ask Rasulullah. So, all of these things. Who's the marja? Marja is Rasulullah at that time. Everyone's referring to him. Now, he's one person. He hasn't gone ahead, and it's not a time where there are a lot of, scholars who are offering these services. if you have opportunity to meet the best of the best, hypothetically speaking, no comparison whatsoever, imagine if a marja taqleed was here in New Jersey. Nobody will come and see me. Nobody will come and see another Maulana. Why? You have the marja. You go directly to the marja. And if the Ayatollah was approachable, meaning you can go see him one-on-one. There weren't guards checking and, doing your research before entering into the house, because there's no fear, right? The way you go to Iraq or Najaf or Qom, when you go see a marja, you have to go through the security and all that stuff, which is true, which is, it has to be done regardless, because there might be people who have wrong ideas. But nonetheless, imagine if we had a marja taqleed, get up from Najaf, get up from Qom and come and start living here in New Jersey, and his house is open for anyone who wants to go see him. People, they'll still contact people like me, but when you have the marja, why would you come to someone like me? So that was the case. Rasulullah is the biggest marja over there. Why would they go to someone else at that point, even if there were scholars existing? So Rasulullah serves that entire purpose for all of the people. And people would rather sit with Prophet. He is receiving the revelation. He is infallible. He is ma'soom. And the advice that they're getting is ultimatum, is the best advice there's possible. He's not guessing things. When people come to people like me thinking that we are experts in, for example, counseling, that's not necessarily true. I may have learned ulum ad-din, but that does not make me a psychologist or psychiatrist, right? So that people come and ask, I'll give them the opinions, I'll try and guide them, but there will be a lot of speculation on my behalf, and then of course I'll have to get another testing or another course before I can go ahead and start doing the counseling and all that stuff. But nonetheless, people approach anyway. Maulana, you know better. They're going through, for example, divorce. They're going through, for example, family issues. They want to come in and speak to Maulana. Now, or people like me who are not really the experts in this field will put together something so that it could be beneficial. But there could be a better opinion given. There could be a better, and then Rasulullah is someone who knows the reality. When two people bring the dispute, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given Rasulullah the ability to know who's lying and who's not. When we come across people, we don't have that ability. Husband says, wife has done this, she's made my life miserable, I cannot live with her. Wife says, husband has done this, he has not paid, he has not taken care of us, his life with him is miserable. Both are, for example, speaking ill of each other. Both are bringing about, faults in each other, in husband and wife. Now, as a judge between the two, I'm going to have to go ahead and, I don't have the, inside story. I don't know the background of it. I don't know. There's no way for me to really find out who's lying and who's truthful in this regard. Or maybe to an extent, both might be truthful. Both might not be lying. But it's very difficult to go ahead and lean on one side or the other. That's why when we do lean on one side to pass a judgment, to go ahead and solve the issue, the other side more than often gets offended. Oh, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. This guy doesn't know what he's doing. But Rasulullah is not that person. He is infallible. He's a ma'soom. Allah has given him this information. When people come, Rasulullah is able to solve their dispute within a moment, within a second, and people don't have to, argue back with him. So when all the people in the community are approaching the same person, you think that the door will ever be closed? No. It'll always be open. They'll always be knocking on his door. Now, Rasulullah is a very hospitable person. So when people come, Rasulullah will also feed them. Rasulullah would also provide for them. Now, with that background, people would come, they'll ask a question. There were some, right-minded people who would come and ask, and then they'll leave. But then there were some people who had nothing else to do. They'll come and they'll hang out. But you've got your answer. You've eaten, now leave. No, they'll be just hanging around. Oh, we'll hang around with Rasulullah until it's time for example, Zohar prayer. No, sure. And then, now go home. No, we'll hang out with Rasulullah until it's time for Maghrib. No, Rasulullah has family. He's got to do other things as well. He's the leader of this ummah. He's got the political, leadership in his hand. and the religious leadership in his hand. He's got to do all of that stuff. And then he's got his personal life. Not one, not two. At a time, he had 9 wives. So he had to get to all of them. And then a couple of kids who were born in their infancy that died, he had to look after them as well. So all that is happening. Rasulullah was, of course, his kirdar, his akhlaq and morals are the most superior. إِنَّكَ لَعَلَى خُلُقٍ عَظِيمٍ. You are at the highest standards of morality. So Rasulullah would never turn around and say to someone, please leave. He will never turn around and say to someone, what are you still here for? Now go. Now people like me, of course, who are following the footsteps of Rasulullah, who are sitting on the mimbar of Rasulullah, we don't have the same kirdar. We'll go ahead and shout at someone. We'll go ahead and yell at someone. We'll even get mad at someone. We'll even go ahead and offend someone. But of course, that's not the kirdar of Rasulullah. Rasulullah would not say a word. Rasulullah didn't say a word. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows that Rasulullah is hurting because of this. But he won't ever complain. He won't ever bring it to his tongue. He won't ever go ahead and, say to anyone anything harsh. Even if those people are offending him, even if those people are hurting him, he won't utter a word out of his tongue. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not stop. It does not stop him from doing so. So Allah sends down an ayat, reveals the verse, which is speaking exactly what was happening at that time. So I read up till the part which says, taking your meal without closing up for the chats, such conduct on your part offends the Prophet. And he's ashamed of asking you to leave. This is the ayat of Quran. This is not Tafsir, this is the actual words of Quran. That he is ashamed of asking you to leave. But Allah is not ashamed of expressing the truth. When you ask his women folk, meaning the wives of Rasulullah, for something, do so from behind the curtain. That is more chaste for your hearts and theirs. You should not offend the apostle of Allah, nor may you ever marry his wives after his death, after he leaves this world. Indeed, that would be a grave sin with Allah. So here, this is the gist. You saw there were multiple things that are mentioned in this ayat. Initially, don't enter the house without the permission is given. If permission is given, you can go. You've had your meal, don't cozy up in the house, leave as soon as possible. You've asked your question, now leave. Don't, hang out at the house of Prophet, making it to be a place of hangout. He's got a family, he's got all that thing to do. He's too shy to ask you to leave. Allah is not shy to ask you to leave. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to speak on his behalf. Number 3, when you speak, when you come to the house of Rasulullah, who else is the family member of Rasulullah? His wives. So the wives are there. There were these chambers that each wife had. So all these wives are there. Now people would try and talk to the wives of Rasulullah. It wasn't the case that they were, confined into some sort of, place where they were not approachable. No, the house was not a humongous fort or a castle where the wives are somewhere and Rasulullah is sitting in the meeting room with the people. So this ayat suggests at least that people were interacting with the wives of Rasulullah when they would go to their house. Look, today in our households, it might not be the same way, right? For example, if someone is coming to meet me, they don't have to meet my wife or they don't have to meet my kids. So I'll just keep them in the guest room or in the meeting room and then the drawing room, and I'll just meet them. The food will be coming. I'll bring the food to them. I'll bring the chai to them. They'll eat, they'll drink, they'll ask their question, and then they'll just leave without even interacting with my family. They don't have to interact with my family. But interaction with my family is nothing wrong, because Quran is saying that these people would interact with the wives of the Prophet. They would speak to them. But Allah says, what? He says, when you ask the women folk for something, so when you do speak to the wives of Rasulullah, do it behind the curtain. Meaning what? Behind the doors, behind the curtain, or when they are fully covered or they are observing the hijab. So this ayat could be taken from this context where they were interacting with the wives of Rasulullah. But how were the interaction? It wasn't like that they were sitting together in the same room. It wasn't like they're sitting on couch together and they were having this, very normal, casual chat with each other. No, that was not the case. But they were having some sort of discussion. They were talking to the wives of Rasulullah. Maybe someone came and asked the Prophet's wife that, for example, certain things related to women, and the wife of Rasulullah responded to them. But when you do speak to them, you speak to them when they are observing the hijab or they are behind the veil. Both of these things could be taken out from this ayat. And then the last thing that this ayat mentions, which is of course exclusively for Rasulullah, that when you meet the wives of the Prophet, and many of them were young. So if Rasulullah dies, and when he does die, don't think about marrying them. You've seen the wife of the Prophet, you might have this inclination that, oh, now I can't marry this woman, but after Rasulullah dies, I'll marry this woman because she'll become, available for marriage. And so, well, that is okay with other women, but not with the wives of Rasulullah. They are ummuhatul mu'mineen. Once they have married Rasulullah, after Rasulullah's death, no one shall marry them and that is a rule, that is a law, which is exclusively for Rasulullah. So this is just the ayat that I translated for you. I didn't even go into the tafsir of it. Let's dive into it, inshallah, in the next few minutes that I have. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So first and foremost, getting permission to enter the house of Prophet is not exclusive rule for his house only. Rather, we all abide by that when we go to someone's house. So you come to my house, you knock on the door, you ring the bell. If I'm home, I'll respond. If I'm not home, I won't respond. And that's something which we all do. You're not going to barge into the house. You're not going to break into the house. You're not going to use, a key, a master key that you have to get into someone's house. That will be considered what? That will be considered that you are, doing something which is illegal in the rule of law, in the eyes of the law. In fact, we read in Quran in ayat number 27 of Surah Nur, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu la tadkhulu buyutan ghayra buyutikum hatta tastanisu. So just to do the tafsir of this ayat, couple it with this ayat of Surah Nur 27, gives you this instruction. Believers, do not enter others' houses until you have asked permission and have greeted the people therein. This is best for you, so perhaps you may remember Allah's guidance. So this is something which is normal for all of us. We all understand this. If you go to someone's house, we ask for the permission. Or we have already sought the permission, can I come to your house? And when you go there, they're at home, they let you in. You don't try to enter their house without their permission. So what is the context of this? This is an introduction to the general rule, of course, as I mentioned, the command that was given in ayat number 27. About a year later, in the ancient times, the Arabs would enter one another's house unceremoniously. Without announcing, they'll just go ahead and enter someone's house. If a person had to see another person, he did not think that it was necessary for him to, call or calling in a sense to meet them, masjid, for example, and say, well, I'll come to your house, for example, later on in the day. No, they'll just go to the house, and at the door, without taking the permission, they'll go ahead and enter. But would enter the house and ask the women folk and the children whether the master of the house was home or not. This custom of ignorance was cause of many evils. Of course, if someone just comes in, walks inside your house without getting your permission, it could be troublesome. If you remember, we had discussed this, and some may have questioned as to how is it even possible. Samara ibn Jundub, that was the person. That there was an Ansari in his house, there was a tree that belonged to this man, Samara ibn Jundub. Now how that belonged, how that happened, that's another story. But this person had a tree that belonged to him in the house of another individual. So imagine you have a tree and it's in my house. You own the tree. Now how that happened, that's another story. Now Samara knows that this is my tree, it belongs to me. I can utilize that tree, and it's a fruit-bearing tree. He would just go inside the house of this Ansari without seeking the permission. He said, well, this is my tree, this is my property, I'm going to my tree. You're not going to stop me from seeing my tree. Ansari said, sure, it's your tree, no doubt. But you're entering in my premises. Seek permission before coming. I have my women folk, I have my children. They may not be observing hijab because they're inside the house. They may not be dressed appropriately. So before coming, knock on the door. You're more than welcome to come. Now, of course, the houses were not like the houses that we have here. If you can imagine the houses back home in Pakistan and India, when you enter, there's a huge, for example, open sahan or something, and then the living space is, further inside. So this was sort of like that sort of a space, which was an open, garden or whatever, and then the living space was there. So Rasulullah said to Samara that, look, he's right, Ansari is right. He's on haq. You can't just enter into his house without getting his permission. Look what I'll do with you. I'll tell you, I'll buy this tree from you, and I'll give you twice the price of it, so that you can give it to this guy, and this no longer belongs to you. Sell me the tree. Someone said, no, I don't want to sell it. Rasulullah said, on this tree, I'll give you a tree in paradise. Meaning what? I'm promising Jannah to you. He said, I don't want it. Rasulullah offered so many things to him, but he was stubborn. He didn't want to. His point was to go ahead and do aziyat, to go ahead and hurt and harm this man. So what happens? Rasulullah said, take the tree, pull it out, uproot it, and throw it outside. ना रहेगा बांस, ना बजेगी बांसुरी, right? Tree नहीं रहेगा, तो फिर वो जाने का उसका कोई जवाब भी नहीं है. So that happened. Now this is something which we find that happened in the history, and Rasulullah has said at this point, La zarar wa la zirar fil Islam, that there is no zarar, there is no harming anyone, and there is nothing of that sort in Islam. You cannot be harming anyone, you cannot be hurting anyone, even if there's something that is yours. Now, with that in mind, there were people who were walking into the houses of the people without the permission until this ayat came down. The second command in this connection, an uncivilized practice prevalent among the Arabs was the visitor would call on a friend or acquaintance right at the time of the meals. Ab tumhe pata hai ki bhai, we eat dinner at 6 o'clock. Now you're showing up at my house at 6 o'clock. What does that tell? That tells me you want to eat food with me. You know, you could have come at 5, you could have come at 4, you could have come at 7 or 8. You show up at the time of what? At the time of dinner or at the time of lunch. So this was another practice. So they would come at the time of meals or would come and prolong their stay until it's time for meal. So they come at 5 o'clock knowing that 6 o'clock is the meal. So they're going to stay there until then. Why? That was another practice. Number 3, this was to reform yet another foolish practice. The guest at a feast, after they had finished eating, would sit down to endless gossip and discussion, much to the inconvenience of the people of the house. So you invited people to your house for a dinner. They came, they ate, now they're just lingering around. Now they're just hanging out. You're looking at the clock, it's time for me to put the kids to bed. They're still sitting. Looking at the clock, now it's time for me to go to the bed. They're still sitting around. Now, you're too nice to tell them that, leave my house, because that'll be inappropriate for you. But these people are not realizing it. So the ayat came down to spell it for them, to yell at them that, look, what's wrong with you? You come to someone's house, you get invited, you stay there for a little while. Don't make this to be your second house, that you're going to spend the night over there, unless, of course, you are told to. So this is the verse which is called the verse of the veil as well, because of the context which is talking about the parda, or speaking to the wives of the Prophet behind the veil. So I still have a few more minutes in my hand. There are some rules of hospitality mentioned in this ayat. So if you want to learn hospitality, you can find this ayat which talks about how should you deal with the guest. And the remaining etiquettes are mentioned in other places in Quran. So in ayat number 61 of Surah Nur, it says, say salam when you enter. So that's the first thing. That's the first etiquette. When you enter someone's house, you say what? Salamun alaikum. You should be the one saying it. Number 2 in Surah Nur 28, if they didn't give permission, do not get angry. Return. إِذَا قِيلَ لَكُمْ إِرْجِعُوا فَارْجِعُوا. It's not that when they weren't home, you leave. You came, you knocked on the door, and said, well, we're busy at the time. Don't get angry. Leave. You didn't have prior appointment. So if they tell you to turn around and go back, don't feel angry. There's this video where they made a song out of it in Arabic that, father says to the child that if someone comes to the door, tell him that dad is not here. So someone comes to the door, the child opens the door and says, is your dad there? He said, no, dad said he's not here. Right? So there's a song of it, Baba Telephone. If you search that, you'll find it, Baba Telephone. And Baba Telephone is when someone calls on the phone, actually, not at the door. Someone calls on the phone, Dad says, tell him I'm not here, I'm not here. He's speaking. He picks up the phone and says, yeah, Baba is saying he's not home. So it's like, you're spoiling it for me. So if someone says, leave, don't mind, don't get angry. But of course, we can't expect that in our culture. If I have come to your house, even unannounced, you're going to let me in. Otherwise, you're never seeing me again. When you invite someone, serve them nicely. That's another etiquette. Islam does not want you to be stingy about it. When you've invited someone or when someone has come, even if it's not for a meal, serve them. Provide them something. This is a hospitality which ayat number 69. فَمَا لَبِثَ أَنْ جَاءَ بِإِجْلِ حَنِيذٍ. Hazrat Ibrahim ﷺ brought for them a roasted calf. He treated them with nice food. So when you invite someone, serve them nicely. Bring the food to them. Serve them with your own hands. With your own hands. Ayat says, Surah Dhariyat 27, فَقَرَّبَهُ إِلَيْهِمْ. When they come, bring the food to them. This is one of the etiquettes. Don't let them come to the food, you bring the food to them. That is to say that you are serving them, because they might be shy. I don't want to take this, I don't want to take this. And they might be shy, the people might be looking at them. You bring this dish to them. You bring this another dish to them. You bring this third dish to them, so that they don't feel shy and they eat well from it. This is Surah Dhariyat 27. And then these are just 4 things that you find in these 4 ayat. Surah Nur 61, Surah Nur 28, Surah Hud 69, and Surah Dhariyat 27. But you find hundreds and tens of other similar manners in ahadith. The word inah in the beginning of this ayat means food being prepared. غَيْرُ نَاظِرِينَ inah refers to the fact that you shouldn't arrive before the food is ready, so that you linger around for it to be ready. This address is not particular, of course, as I mentioned, to the prophets and his wives only. Rather, the words أَطْهَرَ لِقُلُوبِكُمْ وَقُلُوبِهِنَّ tells us that Allah wants this for all pure-hearted men and women. Now, I'll skip past some of the messages that we can find in it. Faith requires compliance with social etiquettes. Without it, your iman is incomplete. Hospitality of the guest is amongst the sunnah of Rasulullah. It is also important to invite people. It brings them, this personability that you have with them, the close relationship. Don't go without the permission. Leave after having eaten. All of those things are some of the lessons that we can derive. But the last part that I will inshallah conclude with, when you ask his women folk for something, do so from behind a curtain. This is more chaste for you, for your hearts and theirs. So he's speaking to the wives of the Prophet with their hijab in place is okay. So if you go to the house, someone's house, and the women folk come out wearing proper hijab, there's nothing wrong with you. You can speak to them. This tells us that the wives of the Prophet were not confined and were in contact with the outside of the house. فَاسْأَلُهُنَّ مِنْ وَرَاءِ حِجَابٍ. Speak to them or ask questions from them behind a curtain or when they have observed the hijab. Speaking from behind the curtain is referring to them observing the hijab or having a veil in between, because if you speak to someone face to face, especially na-mahram, it may lead to fasad and it may lead to something of haram. فَاسْأَلُهُنَّ مِنْ وَرَاءِ حِجَابٍ ذَلِكُمْ أَطْهَرُ لِقُلُوبِكُمْ وَقُلُوبِهِنَّ. This is pure for you and pure for them. So hijab is useful for both men and women. A relationship with a na-mahram without keeping the hijab is the cause of hurting the Prophet. Ayat of Quran says, وَمَا كَانَ لَكُمْ أَن تُؤْذُوا رَسُولَ اللَّهِ. And if you were to go ahead and hurt Rasulullah, كَانَ إِنْدَ اللَّهِ عَظِيمًا. This is considered to be amongst the major sins. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, give us a tawfiq to reflect on the commands and the teachings and the etiquettes that are mentioned in this ayat and the other ayat similarly. Wa akhiru da'wana and alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Allah. I'll proceed to namaz.
Auzubillahi minash-shaytanir-rajim. Bismillahir-rahmanir-rahim. Innallaha wa malaikatahu yusalluna 'alan nabi. Ya ayyuhallazina amanu sallu 'alayhi wa sallimu taslima. Subhanallah walhamdulillah wa la ilaha illallah wallahu akbar wa lillahil hamd. Allah